At Five Star Bank, community is at the heart of what we do. Every day we strive to have thoughtful solutions for our customers and help our communities prosper. Honest dialogue about the issues affecting the region is vitally important to that prosperity. We are proud to be part of the conversation and hope you'll join in.
Justice is not always equal. While America is often hailed as having the best system of laws and constitutional protections in the world, examples exist of injustice when our laws or our legal matters are biased or unfair. The Legislative Public Policy Clinic students at the Pacific McGeorge School of Law identify those issues and take on changing law and policy in California. Joining us today are part-time law professor and president of the Personal Insurance Federation, Rex Frazier, and law student Elizabeth Kim. Rex, how did this policy clinic get started?
It really started off by accident. I teach a second course called Legislative Decision Making, and in that course students learn the fundamentals of how to testify in the legislature, written materials that you might submit on behalf of a client when you're seeking to influence legislation, as well as all of the so-called non-deliberative factors that exist outside the Capitol: politics, campaigns, elections. And at the end of the course, the students really wanted more, and so we brainstormed in class one day, and we came up with this idea: what if students actually developed their own legislative proposals and do them? And so we had to have a first lot.
They couldn't do worse than the elected officials that were in charge across the street, right?
Well, I hope one day to build sympathy within you for what they go through. It's a very challenging job. But the students, they first had to convince the school to let us do this. So we concocted our first lobbying exercise, which was each student identified which faculty member or administration official that they would spontaneously come up with the idea of saying, hey, what if we have this clinic where we can do these different things? And so they embarked upon their lobbying exercise, and before you know it, very quickly, the school responded, gave me a call and said, you wouldn't believe this, your students would really like to do an extra class, a clinic where they can develop their own proposals. And so it took off from there.
Really? And so what exactly does the clinic do?
So the clinic, when I first applied to it, I learned that it's an opportunity for law students who may have some governmental experience working in and around the Capitol to really develop their skills and understanding of how the legislative process works. So I was drawn to it for the opportunity to further my experiences as I've previously worked in the legislature, and to really pick topics that are personal to us, opportunities that you wouldn't get working as a staffer in the legislative offices, and then to really follow it through the legislative process. But in my case, I've also learned that the clinic is also dynamic in that it allows us for an opportunity to not just work on bills, but to work on coalition building, contacting the right organizations and key players in the legislative process, and to connect those people to where we can bring awareness and generate a discussion about issues that are important to California.
And what are you learning in this clinic that's different than the work that you've already done in this environment already?
So I was previously a field representative in the legislature, and I work in government, state government now. And one thing that I'm learning in the clinic that's a little bit different from my prior professional experiences is just the amount of work that goes in before you can even introduce a bill. So you have to really have an understanding of issues, understand the history behind it, all of the people that are involved in it and invested in it, and you're sensitive to a lot of those involvements, and then you brainstorm. So we as a clinic, every Thursday when we get together, we generate the discussion about the issues we care about, and then we take from Rex's experiences and his many connections to really put all of our heads together to figure out how it is that we can approach this topic and how can we go about bringing change to it or awareness around it.
Rex, how do you select your topics? What rises to the top and what typically falls out?
Well, I certainly don't select anything, my goal is to help people who care about an issue pursue that. And so what I try to counsel the students is, it doesn't matter if you're conservative or liberal or business or labor, or you pick the dispute. It's what do you have passion around? And then we start figuring out where's the sweet spot between what you can do and what would be meaningful. And so before even the first class, I have the students break up into groups, because this legislative process is so complicated and difficult that you can't do a project on your own. And they come into their first class saying, we're interested in this. And so the first class of this last clinic, or the current clinic that's going on, we had people talking about wanting to change the time zone, you know, all sorts of things. And then you have to start helping them see, well, there's a problem with that. There's a legal issue, there's a constitutional issue, there's a policy issue, there's a moral issue, whatever it might be, and start counseling them.
What type of big issues, though, has the clinic taken on?
They range all over the map. Last year's clinic was a big accomplishment because 4 out of the 5 projects that were introduced into the legislature were signed into law by the governor.
What did they cover?
So some were ripped from the headlines, some came out of students' own imagination, some were accidental projects.
Like which ones were ripped out of the headlines?
Well, certainly the issue of revenge porn, which is when a couple engages in a consensual act, they would film it, let's say, and then the relationship goes south, and then an aggrieved person decides, oh, wouldn't this look good on the internet? And how does the person who doesn't want that private act to be seen by everyone, how do they stop that from happening? And so the legislature had passed a bill calling that activity a crime, but one of the students had worked for a domestic violence organization, and the feedback she heard was women who are in that situation, they may not want to have to press charges and have their name in a public filing saying, I did this sex act and now it's on the internet, and they want a safe and discreet way just to get it down.
And so before this work that your clinic did, the existing law was you had to file charges or sue somebody or something like that, and then it's everywhere.
Well, yes, because it was a new issue, there was no existing law. And recently the legislature passed a law saying this is a crime under these circumstances. But that wasn't really the remedy that many people were seeking.
So what was the remedy that your students helped put into place?
So the students worked for many, many weeks trying to figure out how can we provide a remedy. And so working with the state's judicial council, they found a new procedure that's only used in one other case, where you can file a case under a pseudonym saying this, I'm in this situation.
Anonymous name, in other words.
Exactly, and that way your name is not associated with a public filing saying there's this material up on the internet. And then the evidence that you would put into the case could only be seen in a judge's chambers. So now video of you or whatever, a picture of you might not be, or would not be in the filing. And you could get injunctive relief, meaning that a judge could order the other party take it down, and then that civil action was put into law.
That must be really meaningful to be able to impact policy in that way.
Absolutely.
And when you and your colleagues are participating in figuring out what you're going to work on, is it always something where it's, you know, DNA evidence or something like that, you know, something that's really kind of like a big civil rights or civil liberties type issues, or does it go to the mundane as well?
So when I initially joined the clinic and I was in a group, we talked about all kinds of issues. We didn't really know where to start, really, other than the fact that we all had our own different political backgrounds. But I personally am very passionate about civil rights issues, and so when our school, McGeorge, hosted an event regarding Picking Cotton, the book that was written by 2 individuals, one of which was convicted wrongfully for a crime he didn't commit and served 11 years in prison for, and then he was released after DNA evidence exonerated him and the other person who wrongly identified him had reconciled and had written this book together.
Really?
Yes, it's absolutely amazing.
Picking Cotton, and who's the author?
Jennifer Thompson and Ronald Cotton are the authors. And they came to an event at McGeorge last month and spoke about the inefficiencies, the errors that...
What was the story of Picking Cotton in terms of what happened that was the injustice?
The injustice in that story was that Jennifer Thompson, as a young 22-year-old college student, was brutally raped at knife point in her home, and then was told to identify the perpetrator in a lineup, and she made the mistake of wrongly identifying Ronald Cotton. He was convicted and served 11 years in prison. Thankfully, through DNA evidence, he was exonerated, and the book speaks from their perspective as they went through that experience. And it's amazing how they've reconciled since that happened and since he's been released.
So DNA evidence exonerated him. What was her reaction in terms of having sent this man to prison for all these years?
It's obviously very devastating for her to learn that she was responsible for wrongly convicting someone. She took it upon herself to do something about that. She sits now on the North Carolina Innocence Commission. She works very hard by conducting lectures throughout the country with Ronald Cotton to speak about this injustice so that she can try to make the change so it doesn't happen.
So let's come back. So you were really inspired by this event taking place.
Yes.
And so what happened next?
I reached out to Ronald Cotton and Jennifer Thompson on Facebook and sent them a message to tell them, hey, I work in government, I work at the Public Defender's Office, I really want to try to help. And thankfully, at the same time, the dean at our school, Dean Jay Moots at McGeorge, reached out to Rex to let him know that, hey, there's something we have to do about this, what can we do? And I'm just so thankful that we have a clinic that's designed to address issues like this. So when Rex came to our class the following week after break, he proposed that idea to us, and I had already been talking to Rex about something related to criminal justice reform and working with the Innocence Project. So when this kind of fell in our lap at the same time, it just was perfect timing. And so we started to reach out to Innocence Project about this particular issue. We talked to Ronald Cotton and Jennifer Thompson about it, and so now we're at a place where, with Rex's background and his connections, he was able to propose someone wonderful for this effort, who sits as the chairperson of the Legislative Black Caucus, Assemblymember Reggie Jones-Sawyer, and he's very enthusiastic about continuing the discussion as well. And so it's exactly this kind of thing that the clinic does and allows for somebody like me who cares so much about civil rights to have an opportunity to work.
Now, do you think that this is going to result in legislation of some sort that the clinic will work on, or is it merely just a policy discussion?
I would like to hope that eventually legislation can come about this. Right now we're in a situation where we want to be respectful of the long work that's taken place already by the Innocence Project, but my role, I feel like, is to brief the chairperson, Assemblymember Jones-Sawyer, on this issue and bring all of the players to the table and really raise awareness around it, especially in light of the fact that we have a national issue with the Ferguson incident in New York.
And just incidentally,
sure.
the sort of concept for the change that might be proposed, that's being discussed about, generally what is it?
It's eyewitness identification reform, and we know that in the past it's failed 3 times in the legislature, but right now what we're working on is strategizing and thinking of methods to adopt best practices, and what that is having law enforcement really standardize how they have procedures for identifying perpetrators in a lineup, for example. So having the victim identify them through double-blind identification procedures where they're not picking a perpetrator from a lineup of suspects, but rather looking at them one at a time individually.
And that matters?
And that does matter because what the book illustrates and what Jennifer Thompson articulates very well is that when someone, a victim of rape, for example, is put into a situation where they have to identify the perpetrator, they feel a lot of pressure considering the fact that they were victimized. it was a horrific event for them to have to go through. And then also the responsibility they might feel that they have to get the perpetrator, because otherwise this person can be roaming free in the streets. So with all of those pressures, they feel inclined to identify someone, and sometimes by mistake, as in this case.
To tragic circumstances.
Absolutely, with somebody like Ronald Cotton, who was wrongly convicted and had to serve 11 years. That's such a long time.
Wow, Rex, that is pretty heavy, and being able to connect into a senior legislator and bring them in to sort of sponsor and convene these types of discussions, which ultimately might lead in a procedural or a policy or a law change. That's pretty heavy stuff for students.
It is, and so that's my responsibility to help coach them through what is a very serious situation, but also which involves a lot of other parties. The last thing that any law school would want is to jump into a policy issue where a whole number of well-meaning people over many years have been trying to confront these serious issues, and to make things worse by saying, we're going to do this or we're going to do a bill. Well, that could be counterproductive, because if you talk with the advocates in this area, they've worked very hard to build a respectful conversation with law enforcement, who you can see how very easy it would be for them to be defensive and feel that any discussion is implicitly a criticism about law enforcement technique, and nobody wants to do that. So the trick is, how can Elizabeth and her partner in this project be helpful and take advocates who really in the criminal justice world are more courtroom oriented, are more community oriented, and use the presence in Sacramento that we have with the state capitol to say there's a conversation here we can facilitate, and it may one day result in legislation. But
do you think that hearing from students who are obviously very passionate and committed to this issue, does that sometimes break through the white noise of kind of the regular processes and conversations that take place?
It absolutely does. It's been genuinely rewarding to see how the students are received, because first and foremost, the largest supplier of lawyers in the Capitol community is this law school, is McGeorge. So there's already quite a network of staff and lobbyists and even legislators who went there, many of whom went there at night, like me, when they had a full-time job, and they know what this commitment is in going to law school. And when they get a chance to see a well-meaning person who's done her homework and who is earnest and wants to make a difference, what impulse would someone have to say, I'm not going to help?
Which raises for me, what makes you so passionate about this? It comes through so strongly.
Oh, thank you. Well, I would have to say that my story is a very classic American story. I immigrated here when I was 6 years old from South Korea. I grew up with just the idea that education is really a key to a bright future. My parents instilled that in me as I was growing up. And my career really started with education. I was a preschool teacher formerly, and I learned, as we all know, that preschool teachers teaching children the fundamentals of many important things in life are very underpaid. And so I started letter writing campaigns and took an opportunity to travel to Washington, D.C. and learn and met many like-minded young individuals who were motivated about lots of issues in the country. And that really just instilled a passion for political organizing and campaigning. From that, I made it a goal to further my education and try to get my foot in the door at the Capitol, and started my legislative career working at the Capitol, starting with then Assemblymember Dave Jones and then Assemblymember Huber, and really learning a lot about issues and how I can make an impact. And just also coming from a middle-class working minority family, I see that all these issues really impact us on a day-to-day basis. Not only that, but really representing a lot of the constituents in the district with so many issues. And that's pretty much where my passion comes from. And ultimately, I learned that my ability to help these individuals, the underserved, is limited without a legal education. And so I decided to go to night school at McGeorge while working in state government, and I've found even more opportunities to give myself to the community, and this clinic is just a fine example of that.
So what does this clinic mean to you?
It's pretty much taking everything that I've learned in my educational and professional career and really developing my own kind of idea of how I can impact the state, and allowing Rex's experience and background to guide us and coach us as we figure out how we're going to implement these changes. It's much more personal than I've ever experienced working for a for a legislative member in the Capitol. You're lucky if you are working with a boss who has similar goals as you do, but this is an opportunity for us to really be a leader in how we're going to pick these topics, work on them, and receive the experience and guidance from somebody like Rex.
Rex, that's an amazing story. It must make you extremely gratified to hear that type of commitment and passion. Since you started the clinic with the law school, what are the proudest achievements that your students have attained?
We could measure that a number of ways. The results would be one way, but also just...
Well, the way that's most important to you.
Well, in the first year of the clinic, we didn't know how this was going to go. And at a minimum, it would be nice to have the students understand this is the legislative process, and you've participated in the development of a proposal, it's in print, and you had a committee hearing, but you're only a law student, and so your bill gets killed and it's over, but it's a good experience. That was sort of the minimal goal. But then we had in our first year 5 bills that were introduced, and 4 of them remarkably were signed by the governor. And they were real bills.
Student originated bills. Yeah. Obviously a member has to introduce them, yes, and work them through. 4 of 5 were signed into law.
Governor Brown signed 4 of, well, he signed all 4 that he received. We had a 5th that demonstrated how complicated this business can be, and it got hung up on some issues, which the new clinic is now going round 2.
Just in short order, give us the topics,
sure,
of the 4 that were signed.
So the first one we've talked about a little bit, the revenge porn bill. The second one dealt with elder abuse. And one of the other clinics on campus, the Elder Law Clinic, helps indigent folks figure out what can I do in a situation where there's an elder abuse situation. A woman came to the clinic who had called the police 30 times for a relative of her abusing, or a relative of hers was abusing her, and she didn't know what to do. And the students just saw, my goodness.
So what was the bill? What did it do?
So the bill put into peace officer training, additional module on how to identify elder abuse situations when you come to the door and no one's bleeding, no one's bruised. So otherwise you're just going to walk away as a law enforcement officer. But this would enhance training on how to identify situations that are in need of a remedy, and then also make it clear they understand the things they can offer.
What are the 3rd and the 4th?
The 3rd and the 4th. So the next one dealt with a criminal justice issue, and it deals with what happens when expert testimony is used in a case, and ultimately that expert testimony relies on science that over time is deemed junk science, or whatever you want to call it. And this was a project that really, another example of the Innocence Project, working on an issue for many, many years.
And so what did it change?
What it said, well, it responded to what the California Lawyer magazine a few years ago called the worst decision of the year by the California Supreme Court. And so this was a bill to overturn that California Supreme Court decision that said, if someone is convicted based upon expert witness testimony that subsequently over time is junk science or discredited, that the inmate would be allowed to seek a new trial. And okay, as you can, and so that bill passed, and the person involved in that particular case in the California Supreme Court has since filed a petition, and there's a potentiality that he would become released.
Making a difference yet again. Yeah. And the last piece of legislation that was signed?
Let's see, what was the last piece of
we'll come back to that. What I'm interested in knowing is, in our final moments, what's next for you? You're in this law clinic, you're going to law school, you've had this experience. Where are we going to see you over the next few years?
Well, I am currently at the California Department of Insurance as my day job. I just started working at the Public Defender's Office for 3 afternoons during the week. I'd like to continue working to defend the people on civil rights matters. I want to make sure that I'm advocating for people's rights, constitutional and civil, and advocating for anywhere that a person needs me, a person who needs a voice. I want to be that voice, and I believe that I'm learning the tools and the skill sets to be able to do that through this clinic.
What a really interesting and exceptional opportunity for the young people that are going to Pacific McGeorge School of Law. Thank you both.
Thank you
Very much.
And that's our show. Thanks to our guests and thanks to you for watching Studio Sacramento. I'm Scott Syfax. See you next time right here on KVIE.
At Five Star Bank, community is at the heart of what we do. Every day we strive to have thoughtful solutions for our customers and help our communities prosper. Honest dialogue about the issues affecting the region is vitally important to that prosperity. We are proud to be part of the conversation and hope you'll join in.
All episodes of Studio Sacramento, along with other KVIE programs, are available to watch online at kvie.org/video.